On this channel, I always try to be very even-handed and look at everybody with an equal eye, regardless of what I personally may think of them. Now, I personally look at CD Projekt Red as the leaders of the video game industry in terms of innovation, especially when it comes to big open-world RPGs. I feel that Bethesda has dropped the ball and that CD Projekt Red, rather, has picked it up and has started running with it, at least based on what we saw in The Witcher 3. However, it's important to remember that even companies that we love, respect, and cherish can stumble and can make mistakes. And that's why I want to look today at some news that came out a little while back that I never addressed, and I want to take it very seriously. And that is specifically the Glassdoor reviews that sort of got some attention in the mainstream gaming publications such as IGN and GameSpot, Kotaku, for instance. They all started talking about this, and essentially what Glassdoor is a website that allows employees to rate their employers. You can rate your employer or past employers with complete immunity and anonymity, so you can say whatever you want, get it out there without fear of repercussions, which is pretty cool. It's like Yelp, but for employees reviewing their employers as opposed to a customer reviewing some institution that they received a product or service in. You see, sometimes I'm talking and then I finish a sentence and I don't even realize I finished it, so it just kind of cuts off. Regardless, the reason I want to take this very seriously is because I think that when you're looking at a company, it's very important to consider the working conditions that the employees within the company are experiencing. For instance, the iPhone. Everybody talks about how much they love their iPhone, but you also need to consider the fact that in the Foxconn factories in China where those phones are mass produced, the working conditions often are pretty terrible and crummy, and some people have some real issues with that to the point where they won't buy an iPhone directly as a result. Now, the case of Apple and iPhones at Foxconn factories, of course, is a very extreme example because China in those areas happens to have a very high suicide rate to the point where they even put up nets around the factories that mass produce the iPhones to keep all these little workers from jumping off the building to their deaths. So it's a very extreme example, and I'm not accusing CD Projekt Red of being anywhere near that, but that's just an example of how the workers' conditions can often infer something about the larger corporate structure of the company that's employing them, and it can also inform you of how you should approach their product in the future. Is it ethical to purchase that product and encourage it because in turn you are encouraging that behavior against the employees? You get into a lot of ethical discussions. And that's what I plan on talking about in today's video. We're going to look at some of these reviews for CD Projekt Red, and then I'm going to offer some of my thoughts as to whether or not this affects my opinion of the company and their products. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this down below, but I would at least ask you to hear me out before railing against whatever my opinion is. You might not even know it yet. So when we go to CD Projekt Red's page on Glassdoor.com, we see a lot of information right up front. And essentially what this allows you to do is that you can look at either jobs that they have posted based on employees, salaries. They tell you how much people are getting paid at that given company for certain positions. They tell you about the interview process, so you can even look, if you were to interview for CD Projekt Red, you could go onto Glassdoor, look at how people's interviews went previously and prepare for the interview itself, which is kind of cool. They also talk about benefits and pictures from within the studio. But what we're looking specifically at today are the reviews, and these are reviews from employees to the employer. Now, I do want to stress that some of these, it's very possible, are in fact fabricated. Some of these, I'm sure, are not from actual employees of the studio. However, we can assume that there will be a consistent trend when we look at these reviews, at least the truthful ones. If there's an outlier where somebody says, oh, it's the greatest place I've ever worked, chances are that's an outlier. Maybe that is an actual person who has worked at the company, company, but probably within the company, they are even an outlier in and of themselves because they look at it so optimistically and they don't have that critical eye. Just as if we look at a review and it's incredibly negative with no positives, it's possible that is also an outlier. So instead, we're going to look at the ones that fit right in the middle and float within the general trend. Now, the most common complaint I've seen in these reviews, and I've read all 36 that they have posted here, is specifically about the management within the company. In general, the employees are pretty happy about the tasks that they're given and also their coworkers, but they tend to feel very frustrated with the management that is directly above them, such as this one right here. I worked at CD Projekt Red full-time. This is a former employee, and they said excellent ambition and talent and grit is within the company, but there is inexperienced management below industry wages, and Poland is still a difficult country. Specifically, what he's referring to there is pay, inflation, all of those things. It's just a tough place to work in this industry in general. And apparently, I don't live there, but it's a tough place to work, period. There's this one, great projects, worse conditions. I worked at CD Projekt Red full-time, more than a year, which is important to look at. And these also give you a rough outline of what they think of the company, especially the approval of the CEO, which is very important in judging whether or not employees are actually agreeing with the direction the company is going in. But as he goes on, he says, CD Projekt Red, they make amazing games, best of the best, really professional atmosphere, corporate-like, not emotional like in some other places. There will be no situation where somebody will yell at you, etc. This happens a lot in smaller firms. Overtime was paid and it was voluntary. You could say no, which is a specific reference to previous reviews on Glassdoor.com, where people and past employees claimed that they were urged into overtime against their will, and so they were essentially kidnapped during crunch time, which is a very, I would say, immature and unprofessional way of looking at it. You're in an industry which consists of crunch time, and when crunch time comes around, naturally you're going to be encouraged to stay until the project is done, even if that means you stay till 4 in the morning and you sleep at your desk. That's just the nature of the video game development business when you have very hard deadlines. He goes on to say something that is echoed in many of these reviews, specifically low salaries, junior workers earning very little, way below industry standard in Poland. Senior workers are earning 70% of what they can get in other AAA Polish studios. Generally, people work there for the project despite the salary. And because there are so many people, you don't feel like your project is actually yours. You are just the guy who textured jackets of peasants or animated 3 monsters and a siege tower. And then somebody else took those and tweaked them more, so your original work is not even really your own in the final game. Now, these complaints, I can take them or leave them, specifically the second one with your work being your own. It makes sense to pass the work off to somebody else to give their own flair. That way you get a bunch of people putting their input in, and in general, hopefully that will bring you a better product in the end. But the first complaint is a very serious one, and that is that the employees are paid well below what everyone else in that industry, in that country, is getting paid for the same work. Now, it's important to stress, this is voluntary. If you don't like your pay or your job, you can quit and go to another company if they will hire you and if you do good work. However, people tend to stay on the company because of the project that they're working on. They're really into The Witcher 3. They want to work on The Witcher 3, so they stay despite being paid less. This complaint is serious because it's talking specifically about people's livelihood, but there's more to it than just, oh, he's getting paid less than other people in the industry. Ultimately, yes, but they are choosing to earn less. This is another really interesting review that follows in the same vein as the ones we've been looking at already. He says that there's amazing people to work with, but not in management. Very cool projects, though you can get stuck on boring tasks for a long time. That's going to be true of any game development company, to be fair. He says very good benefits, including a gym inside the studio. That's very good. No micromanagement, understanding bosses, at least when it comes to being late or taking a day off, etc. And then he gets to the cons. Specifically, he says there are low salaries, even for Poland, spreadsheet-driven development, game director changing design on a whim, often contradicting himself. It's actually 5 people making the game, the rest, which is hundreds. Remember, CD Projekt Red is roughly 370 employees. At least they were back in December. Nowadays, they've been hiring a lot. They could be up to 400, 450 employees. We don't really know. They don't disclose all of that information. But he says the rest, which again is hundreds, are just taking orders and opinions don't matter, and they are rarely taken into consideration. Same management mistakes are repeated over and over and over again. Who you know is more important than skills and your actual knowledge, and there's insane crunch time and no time dedicated to polishing the game. This is all very common in the gaming industry, and how do I know that without having worked at one of these companies? Well, because Glassdoor also contains reviews from other game development companies. I decided to compare CD Projekt Red directly with a company that many people hold a lot of bitterness towards and think of as a bad company, and that is EA. EA has actually been awarded twice the Worst Company in America award, which is remarkable to me because there's many terrible companies in America, but they have won it because some people don't like their video games. But nonetheless, there's many, many more reviews on and for EA than there were for CD Projekt Red. And this is likely just because EA is a way bigger company employing many thousands of people, as well as being a company based in the United States. And from what I read in these reviews, it's actually encouraged to review them in the company culture. So they actually tell you to go online and review them anonymously so that they can see how they're doing, which is actually pretty cool. Now, this was a little ditty, sort of unrelated, but I actually found it very, very interesting. Many people, their complaints against EA generally have to do with the management and how they push microtransactions and how they also push basically quantity over quality. It bugs a lot of people. And actually, based on their employees' scores, over 95% of their employees approve of their chief executive officer, a man by the name of Andrew Wilson, which is actually pretty surprising because you would think that the gamers that work for the company would be frustrated that they're forced to put out these products that they don't have a lot of pride in, but apparently they're actually really behind this guy and fully support him, which I found pretty interesting. Especially when you compare that with CD Projekt Red's overall average review of their CEO, which is 15% approving of their CEO. Whatever it is, some of these reviews are fake, I'm sure, and I'm sure that many of their employees have not spoken their minds on the website, and so we aren't getting a fair and equal image of the company. But the fact that only 15% of those who have spoken up support the direction the company is going under their chief executive officer, that says something not good. Not good, very bad, same thing. Tomato, tomato. But the reason I pulled this up was to look at how this company tends to deal with the gaming industry as a whole, which is very fast-paced. You have deadlines, which are very hard, and you have to stay all night to finish a project and to find that bug and fix it up so that the game doesn't break and crash the minute you boot it. Things like that. It's a very intense industry, and I wanted to see if it's just CD Projekt Red who has all these massive complaints about crunch time, for instance, or if EA also has them and if they deal with them differently. Now, I did not read all 1.7 thousand reviews that were posted for EA, but over the probably 50 that I glanced at and read through, the general trend seems to speak to a respect for the employee, at least in terms of benefits and how they deal with crunch time on the whole, and generally how they deal with it is by telling their employees what to expect and then giving them enough time to prepare, and also having huge teams working on these games to try and avoid it. Now, does that mean EA doesn't put out glitchy crap? Of course not. They put out a lot of glitchy crap games when they first launch, but at least they aren't necessarily pushing their employees to the brink of exhaustion or death to get a game out and polished to fix a couple bugs. So it's very different as to how they approach it. CD Projekt Red, on the other hand, seems to both push their employees in these instances with very hard deadlines, but then they also apparently don't encourage much polish. They focus on the meat of the game and sort of throw it into the wind and hope that it works out and they'll patch it later. Now, this, of course, is also reflected in what we saw at the launch of The Witcher 3, which was, of course, a very glitchy game. There was even a glitch where Roach's legs would float up like spaghetti legs in Charlie the Unicorn. It looked ridiculous, but it actually happened. And then he'd float up and land on tents and crap like that. So much so that they actually made a Gwent card mocking themselves for it. But they did release a very large, very glitchy game at launch and eventually did fix it, but it was very glitchy. And so it does seem that crunch time is inevitable with both of these companies, but the way it's handled and approached for whatever reason and in whatever capacity is also different. Now, one of the most interesting reviews I read for CD Projekt Red, especially when comparing it with EA and how their employees viewed the middle and upper management of that company, is this one right here. They say that you will meet nice and talented folks, but you also see them run away the instant that they catch on to what's actually happening within the company. And then they talk a little bit more in detail with the cons, saying almost everyone from higher and middle management have clear game visions. Regrettably, those visions are all contradictory. Since those visions are clear, no need to discuss them. So there's this constant confusion as to whose vision they're following, what ideas they're supposed to be guided by. No one really knows what's going on except for the 5 people we talked about earlier who are the game's directors, but even they have contradictory visions of the game. And when you're dealing with a big company that's 400 to 500 employees strong, everybody has to be on the same page. And for whatever reason, the employees feel as though they aren't. Now, it could in fact be that all of the employees are just mistaken and there is a consistent and unified vision for where, for instance, Cyberpunk 2077 is going. That's very possible, but the fact that the employees don't know what that vision is and believe that there are 5 contradicting and different ones, that's a problem, and that lands on management for not communicating properly to their employees. Regardless, either way you look at it, there is a management problem within the company. He says the CEO is the only one willing to take responsibility and make tough decisions, but he is also erratic and a very chaotic person with no personal interest in gaming, which is a big issue. And this is something that you see a lot of the time where you'll bring in a professional businessman into your company to try to make the tough decisions, but they have no real personal investment in the product you're putting out. They have no pride in it. And so there's this big conflict where it's like, okay, what are we focusing on? Are we focusing on the business or the product? And sometimes it flips and goes one way, and then sometimes it goes the other. It's just tough to tell. But in this case, it seems to be going the wrong way, where the CEO doesn't understand the product that they're putting out. He says none of these noblemen are open to feedback, as anyone below their level is here merely to take orders and not to criticize. At best, you'll be listened to with no effect. And that's an issue. When the employees who are part of the teams cannot voice their opinions and say, hey, this quest is not working, we need to get rid of it or fix it fundamentally. If they can't say that, there's an issue at the core of your company and you have to fix it. Or once you go bigger with a game like Cyberpunk 2077, you're going to start risking complete collapse. He says design changes are based on cloud patterns, dice rolls, or what was on the TV the night before, which is kind of a cheeky way of saying that it seems as though this is a very erratic way of directing a game, where the employees don't know why a decision has been made, they just have to blindly follow it, and that's an issue. He goes on and says, crunch here is insane. We read about Bungie's crunch and Mass Effect Andromeda's crunch, and we all laughed. And here his English is a little broken because, again, he is Polish, but he says, and crunch will hit our current project very hard, Cyberpunk 2077, because of spreadsheet planning and incompetent overseers. It will inevitably lead to hemorrhoids, bad backs, and depression, which is a very bad and cynical way of looking at it. And listen. So I love CD Projekt Red. I think they put out a great product, but when we see these types of comments coming from their employees, the people that are actually doing the labor, crafting and sculpting this thing that we love, we have to realize that the people we actually enjoy the work of are not the management of CD Projekt Red, but the artists within it. And if they're being treated very poorly or being disrespected to the point where they feel as though they aren't paid justly for their work, but they have to stick around because they love this project they're working on, or they feel as though they aren't being listened to, they have no say in the project, that's an issue. That's a problem, and it's something I personally would like to see changed. Will this keep me from buying CD Projekt's next project? No, I don't think so, because ultimately this isn't a life or death issue. It is an issue with how they're treating their employees. I would like to see it improved, and I'm sure they're actively taking steps to do so, especially with videos like these going up. But that is fundamentally why I chose to make this video, because I want to say what no one else seems to be saying, because we all love CD Projekt Red so much. But if we love something and somebody, we gotta be willing to have the tough talk with them and say what we really think. And in this case, I love you, CD Projekt Red. I love you, but you got to get this crap together. This is not okay, and I want to see it improved. But that's all I have to say. I want to hear your thoughts down below. I love you all. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.